Welcome to Kart Class, brought to you by 18 times Australian champion David Serra. Kart Class strives to give kart racing drivers the fundamental driving skills, kart setup, and the mindset required to take you from beginner to winner. Your host, David Serra, has over 25 years' experience in kart racing and is the most successful driver in Australian history.
G'day guys, and welcome back to another episode of Kart Class. Today we're going to be discussing the caster. So basically, when we're talking about caster on the front end, we're going to be looking at full caster, neutral caster, or central caster. They can be sort of called either way, or minimum caster. And basically, the reasons as to why you'd like to have one over the other, and in what conditions that you'd like to be using one across the other one. So when we're looking at caster in the front end, it's basically how much load it's going to be putting onto the tyres. So as a driver and as your cart's circulating around the circuit, basically the more caster that you are adding into the front end, it's going to allow that inside wheel to lift up a lot more and to basically unload the rear tyres. So instead of with carts not having a diff and no suspension and things like that, it gets a little bit hard to steer around some of the corners. So in some instances, you can basically increase the caster so that inside wheel lifts up, and it allows the cart to just sort of circulate and to turn a little bit easier as well. So when we're looking at our adjusters, if you're sort of looking at, an OTK system or even a arrow system, things like that have got the arrows pointing on the front camber adjuster, they've obviously got an arrow pointing in one direction. To identify a full caster, it's basically going to be an arrow going forwards, and then the bottom adjuster, if there's also an adjustment on the bottom, it's going to be going backwards. So top one pointing towards the front of the chassis, and then the bottom adjuster pointing to the rear of the chassis. In this instance, full caster is basically the maximum front grip that you're going to get. And so the way you can identify it is basically when you adjust your adjusters, you'll be able to see the kingpin is going to be pulling towards the back of the cart. So the top of the kingpin that you've got going through the stub axle is going to be pulled backwards, and that's going to be creating more load on the front tyres as well. So full caster sort of comes into its own in the wet conditions, in the slippery conditions, because what it does is, again, for the wet weather, it gives you that more front steer. It creates that higher lift of the wheel, and it allows the cart to turn more. One thing that drivers will notice when they have the full caster in the cart is it gets quite heavy in the arms. So for your cadet drivers, because they're so small, sometimes you like to run in slippery conditions on the slippery, harder compound tyres. You like to run a little bit of caster just to allow the cart to actually grip, so that the kids can actually get around the corners quite fast. But you find out a lot of the kids they complain that their arms get sore and get tired because it gets quite heavy for them as well. So you need to be careful about putting too much caster in. Now, when we're looking at just central caster or neutral, it's basically when, again, looking towards those arrows on our adjusters, they're both going in the same direction. So whether they're both going forward or both going the back, that the kingpin itself is just nice and central. So it's nice and straight up and down. And basically, that's going to be used in most instances. So again, whether you've got too much grip or not enough grip, that's how most of the carts are designed out of the factory settings. So that's generally how we set up most of our carts. It's got the best balance. And then when you're looking to go to minimum caster, that's the easiest, the lightest you're going to have in the front end. So when you're sort of turning the wheel, it's very, very quick to turn, very light. So it's harder to get a bit of a feeling through the steering wheel. But that adjuster is going to be facing backwards on the top, so facing towards the rear of the cart, and the bottom adjuster is going to be tilted towards, pointing towards the front of the chassis. So that's sort of used in, again, it's just, like I said, we personally don't use it very much, minimum caster. It does make the front end, very, very fast to turn, and also makes the back end quite lively. As I said, look, I'm just trying to think of an instance that you'd probably like to use minimum caster. I would say that if you've actually got a bit too much grip, you can sort of try and use it a little bit. So again, if you want that quick initial steering, if the steering was a bit too heavy for you to steer, you can take some caster out of it, and that can generally make the back end, like I said, a little bit more slippery and a bit more release out of the corners again. So We've also got different adjusters that just have a halfway point. So if you've just got no adjustment at the bottom, if the adjuster's just nice and central, then you can only adjust the top adjuster. But basically, like I said, they're sort of the instances where you would like to use the caster to your advantage. Like I said, slippery, wet conditions, go to full caster. If it's dry conditions, try and keep it in that central position, so it's just straight up and down. Both the adjusters are pointing in the same direction. Or if the steering is quite heavy and the kart has a bit too much grip and it's quite heavy in the front end, I would look to go to minimum caster. But try and stick away from the minimum caster, because the inside wheel, it finds it very, very difficult to lift the inside wheel, which is going to be, well, like I said, it won't always work into your favour as well there. So hopefully that's a little bit about caster, when to use it, the three different types of the caster that we've got. And like I said, if you've enjoyed the episode, please click subscribe and leave us a review. And also, if there's anything else that you guys want to know more about, if you've got any questions, please feel free to shoot through to kartclass.com.au and send us through your message, and we look forward to you until next time. Cheers.
If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more about your kart racing, be sure to check out kartclass.com.au for driving courses catered to all skill levels.